Hey guys! Today we have two chilling real-life stories for you again. These stories tell what happened during two real incidents, where soldiers were physically attacked by unknown entities. Even skeptics cannot explain what happened. Will you be able to provide some answers? Take a listen to these two stories and let us know. But just before we get into it, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, SightCare. David Lewis, an eye specialist with 37 years of experience, has helped more than 110,000 men and women achieve perfect 20/20 vision using what is referred to as a miracle molecule, and this number keeps skyrocketing by the day. This molecule dramatically improves your eyesight. It was discovered through a very recent study from the British Journal of Hematology. This molecule improves people's vision by an astounding 90% in just 3 months. And if you're wondering how you can get your hands on this miracle molecule, we've prepared a short video where everything is explained. Just follow the link in the description and check it out for yourself. But if your vision is fine, pour yourself a drink, and let's get into the first of the two stories right away. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the remote outpost near Tikrit. The air hummed with the low whir of generators and the distant, ever-present buzz of insects. Inside the small mess hall, Sergeant Callahan sipped on his lukewarm coffee, his gaze drifting over his men. "All right, boys. Tomorrow we've got a recon at 0600, so don't stay up swapping war stories all night," he grumbled. "Come on, Sarge. You mean no ghost stories, right?" He shot a playful look at Specialist Lee, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Oh, don't get him started again," Corporal Diaz groaned, rolling his eyes. "Lee's been babbling about jinns ever since we got here. They're just fairy tales, man. Nothing to worry about." "But they're not," Lee protested. "The locals warned us. This area is cursed. They say it's a place where jinns roam, where they torment anyone who sets foot here." Private Andrews feigned terror, holding his hands up to his face in mock horror. "Ooh, the big bad jinns are coming to get us!" he laughed, making ghostly woo sounds as the others chuckled. Just then, the lights flickered. A chill swept through the room, and the laughter died on their lips. Callahan narrowed his eyes, scanning the room with a slight frown. "Power's just acting up," Diaz said quickly, his voice steady but eyes darting around. "Nothing unusual." The soldiers glanced at each other, an uneasy silence settling over them. Andrews cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Right, it's just the wiring. But if it's not, well, Sarge, guess you'll have to call the Ghostbusters." The room erupted into nervous laughter, but the lingering chill in the air reminded them that some things couldn't be explained away so easily. The following day, the outpost buzzed with the usual routine: maintenance checks, supply inventory, and endless rounds of guard duty. Yet, something was off. Equipment that had been neatly stowed the night before now lay scattered across the ground. The metal gates creaked open and shut as if pushed by invisible hands, and every now and then, a strange gust of wind would send shivers down their spines despite the stifling desert heat. Wind? It's a desert. Of course there's wind. Yeah, well, if it's wind, it sure is picky about what it blows over. Diaz, never one to back down, began explaining the complexities of pressure differentials and wind currents, his hands waving around animatedly as he spoke. He used a wrench and a tin can as props, getting more ridiculous with every passing minute. So you see, it's perfectly logical that a wrench can fall off a table if the localized vortex... Andrews cut him off. "Localized vortex, my ass. Admit it, Professor Diaz, you've got no clue what's going on here." "Neither do you," Diaz spat back, but his tone was less confident now. That evening, while the men gathered for another dull night at the outpost, Andrews felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He turned, half expecting to see one of the guys messing with him, but no one was there. "Anyone else hear that?" "Hear what?" Whispers. "Like someone talking. It's just Lee's ghost stories getting in your head." "Yeah, sure. Ghost stories." Andrews shook his head, trying to brush off the unease, but a cold hand seemed to grip his shoulder. He spun around, heart pounding. But again, there was nothing there. A sharp crack echoed through the storage room. The soldiers rushed in, rifles raised, to find Private Andrews sprawled on the ground, pale as a sheet. "Jesus, Andrews, what happened? It threw me. Something grabbed me and threw me across the room." The other soldiers exchanged worried glances. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it, an invisible presence that seemed to watch them from every corner. "Set up the cameras. We'll get to the bottom of this." The men worked quickly, rigging up the outpost with surveillance equipment. They watched the monitors closely, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. Hours passed, and just as they began to relax, the screen flickered and every camera feed went dark. What the hell? A guttural growl resonated through the room, vibrating through their bones. It was a sound no human throat could produce, low, primal, and filled with rage. Professor Diaz, got any scientific explanations for that? No, none at all, Diaz whispered. Then it came out of nowhere, a full-on assault. Chairs were hurled across the room, bunk beds were upended, and the men were thrown like ragdolls by an unseen force. Andrews screamed as he was lifted off the ground and slammed into the wall. "Get down! Everyone get down!" But his voice was drowned out by the chaos. Specialist Lee, trembling but determined, tried to communicate with the entity. Please, we mean no harm. We will leave if you want us to." Nothing. Then he muttered something that sounded like a curse. The room seemed to freeze. Then a split second later, a massive force crashed into the door, nearly breaking it off its hinges. "Did you just insult it?" No. Shut up and move!" Callahan barked. Pushing them toward the barricade they hastily set up. They huddled in the corner, weapons raised, as heavy footsteps thudded outside. The door creaked, bulging inward, the wood splintering under an invisible weight. "Maybe it was just a really big rat," Diaz whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. The others stared at him, while Andrews burst out laughing, hysterical, shaky laughter that echoed through the room. "Yeah, Diaz, maybe it's just the mother of all rats." When dawn broke, the base was eerily silent. The men emerged cautiously, expecting another attack, but the outpost was still. It was as if the jinn had simply vanished. A higher-ranking officer arrived later that day. He listened to their reports with a skeptical frown, then dismissed them all as battle fatigue. "We're pulling you out. Base is getting shut down due to structural issues." He smirked, but his eyes were uneasy. "So pack it up." The men exchanged weary glances. None of them believed it was over, but what choice did they have? "Guess we'll have to find a new place to bunk," Andrews said, forcing a grin. "Maybe somewhere without guests." Callahan didn't respond, staring at a charred scrap of paper Specialist Lee held up, a paper that had mysteriously appeared under his bunk. As they watched, it crumbled into ash, the symbols on it glowing faintly before disappearing. "Leave it," Callahan said hoarsely. "Let's get the hell out of here." Months later, the soldiers were scattered to different assignments. They rarely spoke about the events they all experienced at Tikrit, but the memory lingered. Each man haunted in his own way. Andrews, of course, had a different way of dealing with it. "Yeah, I wrestled with a djinn," and lived to tell the tale, he boasted to a group of new recruits. "It was huge, 10 feet tall, claws like knives." The recruits' eyes widened, hanging on to every exaggerated word. Callahan, passing by, shook his head with a small smile. "Tell him about the time it made you cry like a baby, Andrews," he called over his shoulder. "Hey, those were manly tears," Andrews shot back, but there was no heat in his words. The humor didn't last long, though. Specialist Lee, back in his bunk one evening, discovered another torn piece of the same charred paper he'd found that night, laying on the floor not too far from his bed. His hands trembled as he read the single word scrawled in dark ink. "Return." Heart pounding, Lee looked up, eyes scanning the darkened room. For a moment he thought he saw a shadowy figure watching him from the corner. He blinked, and it was gone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before the djinn called them back. The fact of the matter is that, when the men left Tikrit that day, they didn't leave alone. The djinn's presence lingered, a shadow at the edge of their vision, a whisper in the dead of night. They returned to their lives, but nothing was the same. Andrews left the military, moved back home, and tried to forget, but every night the whispers grew louder. He woke up with bruises and scratches he couldn't explain, and the shadows in his room seemed to move on their own. Diaz, once the skeptic, became obsessed. He pored over books on the occult, searching for a way to break the djinn's hold, but every attempt ended in failure, and his sanity slipped further away with each passing day. Barnes turned to alcohol, trying to numb the fear that gnawed at his soul. But no amount of liquor could drown out the memories, or the feeling that something was watching him. He tried to stay strong, to be the leader everyone needed, but even he couldn't escape. The djinn's voice haunted his dreams, taunting him with visions of what could have been. And Specialist Lee? He disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a single note. "It's calling me back." They say you can never really leave Tikrit. that once you've been marked by the djinn, it will follow you to the ends of the earth. Maybe that's true. Or maybe, as Andrews likes to tell the new recruits, it's just a ghost story. But the men who survived the djinn attack in Tikrit know the truth. Some things don't end, some things never let you go, and the djinn is one of them. Have you ever heard of the djinn? Do you know more about what it is and where it comes from? Or maybe you have knowledge of similar entities roaming the earth. If you do, please leave a comment and let us know. Who knows, maybe what you know or even your opinion on the subject could shed some light for someone else. So let us know, no judgment. Our second story happened much closer to home. Nellis Air Force Base is situated just outside Las Vegas, Nevada, and is probably one of the last places you would ever expect to run into anything unexplainable. But unfortunately, it would seem that no place is off limits when it comes to the supernatural. The sound of an ear-piercing alarm shattered the stillness of the night, sending Staff Sergeant Ray Parker lurching out of his seat. His boots hit the concrete floor with a thud, heart pounding in his chest, as the shrill blare echoed off the metal walls of the maintenance hangar. He wasn't sure if he'd heard something break, or if his sleep-deprived mind was just playing tricks on him. But when he took a closer look at the maintenance bay, his stomach tightened. The aircraft, a massive F-16 fighter jet, loomed above him like a silent sentinel. But something was off. The diagnostic screens blinked erratically, and the lights above the jet flickered as if struggling to stay lit. A gust of cold air swept through the hangar, sending shivers down his spine despite the Nevada heat. He peered around, his gaze sweeping over the shadows stretching across the vast space. "Must have been a short circuit," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight. But as he took a step forward, he caught a glimpse of movement, a flicker of darkness flitting between the landing gear of the aircraft. "Hello?" His voice echoed back to him, swallowed by the vastness of the hangar. He moved closer, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dimness. It landed on a toolbox lying tipped over on the ground, its contents scattered. Parker blinked. He was sure he'd left it closed. Then, suddenly, a high-pitched giggle echoed through the hangar, bouncing off the metal walls. Parker's grip tightened on the flashlight, his pulse quickening. He spun around, but there was no one there. Just the empty maintenance bay, the faint hum of machinery, and that eerie, bone-chilling giggle. "Ramirez, get over here!" Parker barked, his voice edged with unease. Airman First Class Danny Ramirez came jogging over, his brows furrowed. "What's going on, Sarge? You look like you've seen a ghost." Before Parker could respond, another sound, a clang of metal, rang out behind them. Both men whipped around just in time to see a wrench fly off a workbench and land with a clang at their feet. Then, from the corner of the hangar, a shadow shifted, darting with unnatural speed. Ramirez yelped as something slashed across his arm, leaving a series of angry red scratches. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, eyes wide with shock. Did you see that?" he gasped, looking up at Parker. Parker nodded slowly, a chill creeping down his spine. "Yeah, I saw it. Whatever it wasn't human." The next morning, Parker and Ramirez sat in the mess hall, recounting their story to a small group of bleary-eyed airmen. Most of them listened with expressions that wavered between disbelief and suppressed laughter. Wait, you're saying a tiny... What? A gremlin attacked you? You think these are from a cat? Ramirez spat. "That thing was real. We both saw it." "Or maybe you guys just drank too much jet fuel last night," Thompson teased, earning a few chuckles from the group. But the laughter was uneasy, the kind that bubbles up when nerves are frayed, and no one wants to admit they're scared, especially not of something as ridiculous as a mythical gremlin. Yet as the day went on, more strange reports trickled in. A wrench inexplicably jammed in the engine turbine of another jet, costing the crew hours of extra maintenance. Someone's coffee spilled all over sensitive flight controls, and a ladder mysteriously collapsed just as a mechanic was climbing it. No one was hurt, but the incidents left everyone rattled. By the third day, the airmen had dubbed their unseen saboteur the Nellis Gremlin. The nickname caught on quickly, and despite the growing tension, it became something of a running joke. The crew even set up a trap in the hangar with a camera and, for good measure, a donut as bait. "Think it likes sprinkles or chocolate glaze?" one airman smirked. "Who knows? But if it's anything like you, it'll eat anything," another replied. They waited, and waited. But when the donut disappeared right in front of their eyes, leaving the camera completely blank as if it had been turned off, the laughter died in their throats. "That's it," one airman remarked. We're dealing with something that shouldn't exist. Then, 2 nights later, the Gremlin's pranks turned violent. Parker was alone in the hangar, double-checking equipment, when he felt a sudden violent shove. His shoulder slammed into a metal support beam, pain flaring as he struggled to regain his balance. He whirled around, fists raised, but there was nothing there, just empty air. "Show yourself, you little," he snarled, words dying in his throat as he heard that same high-pitched giggle again. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at the same time. Gritting his teeth, Parker reported the incident to his superior officer, Lieutenant Stevens. The lieutenant listened with a raised eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "So, let me get this straight. You're saying a 2-foot-tall goblin attacked you and then just vanished? You want me to file a report on assault by a mythical creature?" Parker sighed, rubbing his bruised shoulder. "I know how it sounds, sir, but this is real. It's hurting people." The lieutenant shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I think you've been working too many night shifts, Parker. Get some rest." But the humor faded when more injuries started piling up. Ramirez was found unconscious in the hangar with claw marks down his back, and another mechanic narrowly avoided losing a finger when a power tool activated on its own. The once busy maintenance hangar now felt like a haunted house. The airman whispered nervously, casting wary glances at dark corners. Something was out there, and it was getting bolder. Determined to put an end to the madness, Parker and Ramirez decided to take matters into their own hands. They set up motion sensors and infrared cameras all over the hangar, wiring the place like a high-tech spiderweb. Armed with flashlights and wrenches, they took up positions behind a row of toolboxes, waiting in tense silence. Hours dragged by with nothing but the steady hum of the hangar's cooling systems and the distant hum of jets landing and taking off. Then around 3 a.m., the motion sensors lit up. "There!" Ramirez hissed, pointing. Parker squinted, his breath catching. The thing, no, the creature, stood in the shadows. It was no more than 2 feet tall, with leathery grayish skin, a hunched back, and long, gnarled fingers. Its eyes glowed a faint, menacing red, and a toothy grin split its face as it stared at them. Parker's blood ran cold. It was real. It was really real. Hi?" Ramirez offered weakly. The gremlin's grin widened. Then, faster than either of them could react, it lunged. Equipment flew in all directions as Parker and Ramirez swung their wrenches, trying desperately to fend it off. It moved with blinding speed, knocking over toolboxes, overturning chairs, and somehow slipping through every attempt to corner it. Finally, Parker managed to pin it against a wall, but before he could swing his wrench, the creature let out an ear-piercing screech and vanished, just like that, into thin air. "So, does this mean we file a report under extreme pest control?" Ramirez, panting and wide-eyed, glanced at Parker, not finding his feeble attempt at making fun of the situation remotely amusing. By dawn, the hangar looked like a tornado had torn through it. Toolboxes were overturned, equipment lay scattered everywhere, and a few airmen, drawn by the noise, stood gawking at the mess. "Parker, what in the world happened here?" Lieutenant Stevens growled. "Looks like you and Ramirez were having a brawl with a pack of coyotes." "Sir, it was the gremlin. We saw it. We almost caught it, but then it vanished." "Vanished? Look, I've been patient with all this gremlin talk, but if this goes on, I'll have to report this as an act of vandalism or sabotage, and trust me, the colonel won't be as understanding as I've been. But it's real, sir. It scratched me. Look." He held up his torn shirt, exposing fresh claw marks. Lieutenant Stevens' eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, the base's intercom crackled to life. "Lieutenant Stevens, report to the control tower. We have a situation." The lieutenant exchanged a worried glance with Parker. "Stay here, and for the love of all that's holy, clean up this mess." He spun on his heel and marched out, leaving Parker and Ramirez staring after him. "You think he believes us?" Ramirez asked quietly, picking up a wrench. "No," Parker replied, "but he will." The day passed without incident, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. Parker and Ramirez busied themselves repairing the damage in the hangar, their eyes constantly darting to dark corners and shadowed alcoves. When evening fell, a group of airmen gathered outside the hangar, armed with baseball bats, makeshift nets, and a few cameras. "All right, everyone," Parker began, addressing the group. "We're going to catch this thing tonight. No one's leaving until we do. Got it?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, though some airmen shifted uneasily. "And if it bites me, I'm suing," someone muttered, earning a few nervous chuckles. Parker grinned despite himself. "Trust me, if it bites anyone, We'll make sure it ends up in the brig. That night, time seemed to go by extra slow. The night stretched on, and the airmen took turns patrolling the hangar and surrounding area. Hours slipped by with nothing to show for their efforts. Most of them were yawning, fatigue weighing heavy on their shoulders. Then, at around 2 a.m., the hangar lights flickered, once, twice, before plunging everything into darkness. "Everyone, hold your positions!" Parker barked, adrenaline surging through him. He switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. A metallic clatter echoed through the hangar, followed by a low, rumbling growl. The airmen tensed, weapons raised. "Where is it?" Ramirez whispered, his voice tight with fear. "There," someone shouted. All at once, flashlights swung toward the sound. In the far corner of the hangar, the gremlin stood, its red eyes glowing like twin coals in the darkness. But this time, it wasn't grinning. It stared at them with something akin to anger, or perhaps amusement. Parker stepped forward cautiously, wrench in hand. "All right, you little menace. Let's finish this." The creature tilted its head, and for a split second, it almost seemed to smirk. Then with a shrill shriek, it leaped onto the nearest piece of equipment and began its rampage. Airmen yelled, stumbling back as the gremlin darted between them, clawing, biting, and knocking over anything in its path. Someone tried to catch it with a net, but the creature twisted midair, slipping through the opening as if mocking their efforts. The hangar descended into chaos. Parker swung his wrench, but the gremlin ducked and weaved with impossible speed. A toolbox went flying, a ladder crashed down, and then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. The gremlin paused, perched on a stack of crates. It glanced around at the battered airmen and let out one last mocking giggle. Then, with a final flash of red eyes, it vanished, disappearing into thin air right before their eyes. For a moment, no one moved. The hangar was silent except for the ragged breathing of exhausted airmen. Did it just quit on us?" Ramirez asked, lowering his bat. Parker let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. "Yeah, I think it did. Guess it's had enough of us." The group stood there, staring at the empty spot where the creature had been. One by one, they began to chuckle. Quiet, almost hysterical laughter that spread through the hangar. "Well," Thompson said finally, wiping sweat from his brow, "at least we know it has a sense of humor." The next morning, Lieutenant Stevens arrived at the hangar to find it surprisingly intact. The airmen were already back at work, the events of the night before reduced to a series of whispered anecdotes. Parker handed him a neatly typed report. "Sir, we've documented everything." Stevens skimmed the report, his brows knitting in confusion. "No injuries? No damage?" "None, sir. The entity just left. Disappeared." Parker shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "Guess it figured out we weren't the type to play along anymore." Stevens stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right, Parker, I'll file this as a mechanical malfunction. But if I hear so much as a peep about gremlins again, you and your team are scrubbing latrines for the next month. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Parker replied, snapping off a salute. "Latrines it is." As Stevens turned to leave, Parker glanced at Ramirez, who was busy replacing a panel on one of the jets. They exchanged a look, a mix of relief and unspoken understanding. The Nellis Gremlin was gone. But deep down, Parker knew it wasn't over. Whatever that thing had been, it would be back someday, and next time they'd be ready. "Hey, Parker!" Ramirez called, grinning. "Think it's hanging out at Area 51 now?" Parker snorted. "Yeah, probably making friends with the aliens. Poor suckers won't know what hit them." With a final chuckle, Parker turned back to his work, the strange events of the past week fading into memory. Another odd chapter in the long, storied history of Nellis Air Force Base. And somewhere, out there in the shadows, the creature they encountered must still be lurking, a reminder that not all mysteries can be solved. Some just have to be endured. So, what's your take on what these men experienced? Do you think it's a gremlin, like they claim, some sort of cryptid we have yet to discover, or just a case of mistaken identity of something that could easily be explained? Let us know what your thoughts are. And if you enjoy real-life stories of strange encounters with unexplainable entities, you will absolutely love the story on your screen right now. What this woman experienced while on a solo camping trip will make anyone's hair stand on end. Till next time, much love and stay safe.